Blood Moon Conspiracy by Marlowe Graves. Chapter 1. The Ritual. The village of Ainsford had always been a place of mystery. Nestled deep within the dense forests, it was the kind of place most people only spoke of in hushed tones. The town's history was fraught with whispered legends, stories of strange rituals, and unexplainable disappearances. Yet every year, as the time of the blood moon approached, the villagers seemed to retreat into their homes, weary of the coming night. Emma Vale had never given much thought to such superstitions. She had always considered herself a skeptic, someone who trusted science and logic more than folklore. That was until she received the invitation. The letter had been simple, almost mundane in its tone, but the sender's name, the Ainsford commune, rang a bell, though Emma couldn't recall ever hearing of it before. It was an invite to celebrate the rare blood moon, a chance to witness a once-in-a-lifetime event. There would be a ritual, of course, but the letter promised it was merely a ceremonial gesture, a harmless tradition. Emma's curiosity outweighed her apprehension, and when she arrived at the commune, she found herself greeted by serene faces dressed in simple white robes. There was an odd sense of calm, an almost hypnotic air that enveloped the small group. They welcomed her as if they had been expecting her for years, though she had never set foot in this remote corner of the world before. A man, tall and imposing, with an unsettling calmness in his eyes, introduced himself as Rowan. His voice was low, smooth, and carried an unspoken authority. "Welcome," he said, a faint smile playing at the edges of his lips. "We've been waiting for you." Emma tried to shake off the unease that crawled up her spine. There were only a few others, all standing in quiet circles, murmuring softly among themselves. No one seemed to be looking at her directly, at least not with any normal curiosity. Instead, they all appeared focused, as if drawn to some invisible force that Emma couldn't quite understand. The commune was housed in a large, sprawling structure made of stone and wood. It looked ancient, with strange carvings etched into the walls. The air smelled thick with the scent of burning incense, filling her nostrils with a heady mixture that only added to the surreal atmosphere. "Come," Rowan urged gently, guiding her toward the center of the gathering. "The ritual begins soon." Despite her better judgment, Emma followed. She had no real understanding of what was about to happen, but she felt an undeniable pull. Something in the air felt different, like an electric charge, static and dangerous, just waiting to unleash. At the heart of the clearing, a large stone altar stood beneath the open sky. The moon, a deep shade of crimson, hung low on the horizon, casting an eerie glow over everything. The others stood in a wide circle around it, their faces obscured by shadows. Emma hesitated, but Rowan's eyes never left her. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice carrying just above the whisper of the wind. "This is how it must be. We are the keepers of a balance you cannot yet understand." A chill ran down her spine as she realized that they were not the only ones present. A shadow, darker than the night itself, seemed to stretch across the altar. It felt like it was alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. The chanting began softly at first, the words foreign and guttural. Emma strained to make sense of the language, but it was impossible. It sounded ancient, pre-human, as though it was a language spoken by something that had never walked the earth. Rowan raised his arms toward the sky. "Tonight, we call upon the blood moon," he intoned, "to unveil what is hidden, to awaken that which slumbers." The circle around the altar deepened in their chants, their voices growing louder, their words faster, like the beating of 1,000 hearts. Emma felt her chest tighten as an overwhelming sense of dread gripped her. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs refused to obey. The moon overhead began to pulse in time with the chant, casting unnatural shadows that seemed to grow and shrink, twisting like tendrils reaching toward her. The air crackled with an energy so dense it felt like it might crush her. The ground beneath her feet shifted, groaning as though the earth itself was alive. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and Emma could barely breathe. The wind picked up, howling around her as though the very atmosphere was being torn apart. And then the moon shifted. For a split second, everything stood still. The air, the chanting, even the wind, all paused in reverence. And in that silence, Emma heard it. A voice, cold and ancient, whispered directly into her mind. "You shouldn't have come." Her heart stopped. The voice wasn't Rowan's. It wasn't anyone's. It was something deeper, something older, something from the void between life and death. The moon flared suddenly, casting everything in a blinding red light. A scream pierced the silence, a single cry that echoed across the commune, reverberating through the trees and the walls, shaking the very foundations of the house. But no one moved. No one reacted. It was then that Emma realized, in the cold, stark terror of that moment, that this ritual wasn't a tradition. It wasn't a harmless ceremony. It was a summoning. And something was coming. Chapter 2, The Awakening. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the scream tore through the air. It was high-pitched, inhuman, reverberating in the pit of her stomach like an alarm bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The sound lingered in the space between her ears, echoing against the walls of her mind, drowning out all other noise. The moon, now a dark crimson orb hanging like a bleeding eye in the sky, cast a strange glow over the gathered people. Their faces remained impassive, their eyes empty, staring into the nothingness of the night. Their chanting had stopped. All that remained was the oppressive silence, broken only by the distant sound of that scream still lingering in the atmosphere, like a warning. Emma's pulse raced, her body rigid with fear. She could feel the cold sweat on her skin, the air pressing down on her chest like a vice. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. But she couldn't tear herself away from the scene unfolding before her. Rowan's voice broke through the silence, his words low and steady, as though this were a normal, expected occurrence. "The veil has been lifted," he said, his voice calm, but imbued with a dark authority. "The ritual has begun." A cold wave of dread washed over Emma. The scream had been real, and so had the dark presence that had followed in its wake. It wasn't just the moon's glow that had changed. It was the very atmosphere itself. The air was thick, laden with a pressure she couldn't explain, as if the world around her was holding its breath. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rowan turned toward her, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "What you've just witnessed is only the beginning. The blood moon awakens what has been buried for centuries, a power beyond our understanding, a force that cannot be controlled, only tempered." Emma's throat went dry. The words didn't make sense. How could this be happening? This wasn't just some ceremonial gathering. It was something far darker, something she had not prepared for. Rowan took a step forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "You were meant to be here, Emma," he said, his voice lowering. "The blood moon has called you." Her head spun. "What are you talking about?" Before Rowan could answer, the ground trembled beneath her feet. The stone beneath her shifted, groaning as if the earth itself was waking up, stretching its limbs after a long, dark slumber. The trees surrounding the clearing rustled violently, their leaves swirling in the air like twisted, unnatural wind. The stone altar at the center of the circle began to crack, deep fissures splitting its surface as if some great force was trying to break free from within. Emma staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The scream, now muffled, was still there, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. It felt like it was closing in on her, drowning out her thoughts, overwhelming her senses. Rowan, what's happening? What did you do? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. Rowan's gaze flickered toward the altar, and then he turned to face the others, his expression unreadable. It's not what we've done, he replied, his voice cold and steady, as though he were simply observing the inevitable. It's what has always been here. We've only awakened it. The ground shook harder, and Emma stumbled as the tremors grew stronger. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, sharp and heavy, as though the very fabric of reality was bending. The trees around them began to bend at strange angles, their trunks twisting like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The stars above flickered erratically, as though being consumed by a vast shadow that was slowly spreading across the sky. Run, Rowan said, his voice urgent now, though his face remained unchanged. You should leave, Emma, before it's too late. But Emma didn't move. She couldn't. Something had gripped her, rooted her to the spot. The earth beneath her felt alive, pulsing with energy, and the air was thick with a choking sense of dread that seemed to claw at her chest. A scream echoed through the trees, the same sound she'd heard earlier, but this time it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. Emma's blood ran cold. She spun around, her eyes desperately searching the shadows that enveloped the clearing. From the darkened woods emerged a figure. At first, it was only a silhouette, its form indistinct in the dim light of the blood moon. But as it stepped into the clearing, the shape became clearer, a tall, gaunt figure, draped in tattered robes that fluttered as though caught in an invisible wind. Its face was obscured by a hood, but the shadows around it twisted unnaturally, shifting with a life of their own. The figure's presence felt suffocating, like the air around it had been sucked out, leaving only a hollow emptiness in its wake. Who is that? Emma breathed, her voice trembling. Rowan took a step back, his eyes wide with something between fear and awe. It is one of them, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The keepers of the blood moon's curse. The figure took another step forward, its movement deliberate, its presence more oppressive with each passing moment. And as it stepped into the center of the ritual circle, the ground beneath Emma's feet seemed to pulse with an unnatural force. The trees around them shuddered, and the sky above rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Emma wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. The figure reached up with long skeletal fingers, slowly drawing back its hood. And as the hood fell away, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The face beneath was not human. It was pale, stretched, its features elongated and twisted, eyes empty black voids that seemed to absorb all light. It was something ancient, something that had never been meant to walk the earth. And with its gaze fixed on her, Emma knew one terrifying truth. The ritual had not only awakened something evil, it had unleashed it. Chapter 3: The Awakening. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as the figure stepped closer, its presence hanging over her like a thick, suffocating fog. The air around her was suddenly colder, and the pressure in her head increased until it felt like her skull would crack open. She could barely catch her breath. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her body felt paralyzed, frozen in place by an unseen force. The figure's eyes, those black, void-like pits, were fixed on her, unblinking. There was no humanity in them, only a darkness that seemed to devour the very light around it. And yet, despite the terror that gripped her, Emma could feel an inexplicable pull, as if something deep within her was connected to this entity, something ancient and powerful. Run, Emma! Rowan's voice broke through her trance, sharp and frantic. But it was too late. The figure had reached the center of the circle, its presence now fully absorbing the clearing. The chanting of the commune members had stopped completely, replaced by an eerie silence, one that felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Emma stumbled backward, her legs shaking, but her eyes never left the figure. She tried to move, to flee, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and there was nowhere to go. The figure raised a long, bony hand, and in that instant, Emma felt a sharp tug at her chest, like something was being pulled from her very soul. The world around her seemed to warp, the shadows lengthening unnaturally, reaching toward her, twisting in ways that defied reason. The figure's voice, low, hollow, and almost inhuman, echoed in the air. The moon has spoken. The blood has been spilled. The curse is upon you, Emma. Her name. It sounded wrong coming from its lips. There was no warmth, no recognition, only an unsettling certainty that sent a chill down her spine. Emma's pulse quickened, panic rising in her throat. She tried to scream, but the sound was strangled, suffocated by the presence of the figure and the thick air that now pressed against her chest. It was as if the world was closing in around her, suffocating her, leaving her no room to breathe, no room to escape. Rowan's frantic voice cut through the madness again. This wasn't supposed to happen. This is not part of the plan. The figure ignored him, its focus still on Emma. It took another step toward her, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath its feet, the earth cracking and shifting in response to its every movement. The stones of the altar groaned as if alive, and the trees surrounding the clearing began to lean in, their branches twisting and stretching unnaturally toward the entity. Emma's body felt numb, but her mind was racing. What was this thing? Why was it focused on her? And why had it called her by name? Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What do you want from me? The figure tilted its head, an almost imperceptible movement that made Emma's skin crawl. You are the key, it said, its voice seeping into her mind like poison. You always have been. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Key? What did it mean? She was just a woman who had come back to her childhood home. How could she possibly be the key to this madness? The answer hung in the air, elusive and incomprehensible, like a secret buried too deep to understand. The figure stepped forward again, its fingers outstretched toward her. It was so close now that she could feel the coldness radiating from its form, a deep, unnatural chill that sank into her bones. She wanted to scream, to push away from it, but her body refused to respond. She couldn't tear her eyes away from it, couldn't escape the oppressive pull of its presence. And then before she could even react, it touched her. A jolt of cold shot through her, sharper than anything she had ever felt. Her body trembled violently, every nerve screaming in agony as the figure's hand connected with her skin. It was as if her very essence was being drained, pulled into the void of those unblinking eyes. Emma! Rowan cried, his voice breaking through the haze of her panic. Don't let it! But it was too late. The moment the figure made contact, everything went black. When Emma opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the clearing. The oppressive darkness that had consumed her vision was gone, replaced by a soft, flickering light. She blinked, disoriented, her head spinning as if she had been pulled through time itself. She was lying on cold, stone ground, surrounded by an unfamiliar, dimly lit space. A room? No, it wasn't a room. It was something else, something old, ancient. The walls were made of jagged, uneven stone, covered in moss and decay. The air was thick with the scent of mold and something far more sinister, something she couldn't place but instinctively feared. Her heart raced, her breath shallow as she pushed herself to sit up. Her body ached, as if she had been dragged across the earth itself. She looked around, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but nothing seemed familiar. She had no idea how she had gotten here. Footsteps echoed in the distance, slow and deliberate, as though someone, something, was approaching. Emma's breath caught in her throat, and she pushed herself back against the cold stone wall, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The figure from before it was coming closer. A voice, calm and malevolent, drifted through the air like a whisper. "You are not safe here, Emma. This place is where your true trial begins." Emma's chest tightened. She could hear it now, the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears as the dread that had taken root in her soul grew heavier. It was only just beginning. Chapter 4, The Depths of Darkness. Emma's heart pounded against her ribcage as the echoing footsteps drew nearer, the air growing colder with each passing second. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body remained frozen in place. The stone walls of the eerie chamber closed in on her, their jagged surfaces reflecting a dim, flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As she strained her eyes, trying to make out any details in the shadows, the footsteps halted just out of her sight. The stillness that followed was suffocating, thick with a sense of anticipation, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then the voice, low, cold, and malevolent, broke the silence. "You can't escape, Emma." Her pulse quickened as she turned toward the sound, but there was no one in sight. The voice, though, was unmistakable. It was the same voice that had spoken to her in the clearing, the one that had touched her with its cold, cruel presence. It lingered in her mind, echoing through her thoughts like a haunting whisper. The room seemed to stretch in all directions, its walls warping and shifting as if alive. Shadows moved along the edges of her vision, elusive and restless, like dark figures just beyond reach. The air was thick with an unnatural pressure, making it hard to breathe, as though something invisible was pressing down on her chest. She tried to push herself to her feet, but her legs were unsteady, her body weak from the shock of whatever had happened to her. She could still feel the lingering cold from the figure's touch, seeping into her very bones. She wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. "You will understand soon enough," the voice continued, its tone dripping with malice. "The blood moon does not forgive." The words sent a shiver down her spine, but Emma couldn't make sense of them. Blood moon? What did it mean? Why was she here? Her thoughts raced, but every question only led to more confusion, more fear. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She snapped her head toward it, her breath catching in her throat. A figure, draped in shadow, was emerging from the darkness. The flickering light seemed to bend around it, distorting its form as it stepped forward. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, bony limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its face was obscured by the shadows, but Emma could feel its eyes on her, cold and piercing, as if it were reading her very soul. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The figure took another step toward her, its movements slow and deliberate. Its presence filled the room, suffocating her with its oppressive aura. It wasn't just a figure. It was something else, something ancient, something that didn't belong in the realm of the living. "You are the key," it said, its voice eerily calm. "The curse has already begun. The blood must be spilled." The words cut through her like a blade, but they didn't make sense. Blood? A curse? What was it talking about? A surge of adrenaline flooded Emma's body, and she forced herself to stand. Her knees trembled, but she took a step back, then another, her gaze never leaving the figure. The fear that gripped her was overwhelming, but she couldn't let it paralyze her. She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure's lips curled into a smile that sent chills down her spine, though the expression was more a distortion of the shadow than an actual smile. It reached a hand toward her, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt, the floor shifting beneath her feet. "You're in the House of Lost Souls," it said, its voice echoing in the chamber, "and you will not leave until the ritual is complete." The air around her seemed to thicken, the shadows darkening, curling into shapes that almost seemed to have a life of their own. She backed away further, her mind reeling. The House of Lost Souls? What was that? Was this place even real? It felt like a nightmare, like something out of a story that couldn't possibly be true. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. The figure, the shadows, the overwhelming sense of dread. It was all too real. "You can't escape," the figure repeated, its voice now a growl, filled with a dark promise. "The blood moon calls, and you will obey." A wave of nausea hit Emma as the figure moved closer, its hands still reaching for her. She backed up until she collided with the stone wall, the cold, rough surface pressing against her back. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as panic surged through her. But then something shifted. The shadows in the room began to writhe, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways, as if they were alive. The figure's movements became more erratic, its features flickering in and out of focus, like it was struggling to maintain its form. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving Emma alone in the silence. Her breath came in sharp, frantic gasps as she slid to the floor, her back still pressed against the cold stone. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air, suffocating her. What the hell was happening? Was it over? Had she imagined it? She looked around the room, but the shadows remained still, no sign of the figure remaining. She was alone, or so it seemed, but the sense of unease never left her, the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. And then she heard it again, the whisper, "You will not leave until the ritual is complete." Her blood ran cold. The words echoed in her mind, and with them, a terrifying realization began to take hold. Whatever had happened to her, whatever was happening in this place, was only just beginning, and there was no way out. The blood moon had cast its shadow, and she was its prisoner. Emma closed her eyes, her thoughts spinning, and her fear growing with each passing second. The darkness wasn't done with her. It had only just begun. Chapter 5: The Secrets of the Past. Emma's breath came in quick, shallow gasps, her chest heaving as she forced herself to stand. The darkness around her was thick, pressing in like an invisible weight. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what had happened. The figure, the cryptic words, the overwhelming sense of dread. It was all too much to process. But one thing was clear. She wasn't alone here. Not anymore. The chamber felt different now, like the air itself had shifted. It wasn't just cold. It was oppressive, as if something ancient had woken up, stirred by her presence. She turned slowly, her gaze scanning the stone walls that seemed to close in on her with every step she took. There was a low hum in the air now, like an energy vibrating just beneath the surface, too subtle to understand but impossible to ignore. The whispering voice that had tormented her earlier was gone, but Emma could still feel its presence. It lingered in the shadows, curling around her like a predator stalking its prey. She shivered, but her fear was now replaced by a burning need for answers. Why was she here? The house seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own. Emma had been so focused on the figure, the ritual, and the blood moon that she hadn't thought to question how she had even ended up in this place. Had she come here willingly? Why had she returned to the old commune, her childhood home? After all these years, memories began to stir in her mind, fragments of a past long buried. She recalled the stories her mother used to tell her about the commune, about the strange, secretive rituals held by the cult that had once inhabited this place. There had always been whispers, rumors of something terrible that had happened here, something that had been hidden from her, kept from her knowledge. Emma's fingers brushed against the cold stone wall as she walked deeper into the heart of the house. The whispers of her childhood seemed to come alive in her mind, echoing through the silence of the room. The blood of the innocent, the cost of the ritual. A chill ran down her spine, and her eyes widened as she stumbled upon something. A small alcove in the corner, hidden behind a velvet curtain that had once been rich in color, but had now faded with age. The fabric clung to the air, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. She pulled it back, revealing an old wooden chest. It was intricate in design, with carvings of symbols and runes that Emma didn't recognize. The lock was rusted, but not broken, and the chest was clearly untouched for years. Her hand trembled as she reached for the lid. The moment her fingers made contact with the cold wood, a sudden jolt of electricity shot through her veins, and a vision flooded her mind. Images of an ancient ritual, faces twisted in agony, the blood of countless victims spilling into the earth. Her breath hitched as she jerked her hand away, heart racing. She stumbled backward, barely catching herself as she leaned against the wall. The vision was gone as quickly as it had come, but the feelings it left behind lingered, gnawing at her. She swallowed hard, shaking her head, trying to clear the images from her mind, but they wouldn't go away. The house seemed to hum with energy, with a life of its own, pulling her deeper into the darkness of its past. Emma forced herself to take a deep breath. The chest had to hold the answers, answers to the questions that were consuming her. She reached forward again, determined, and this time the lock gave way with a soft click. As the lid creaked open, a rush of stale air filled her lungs, and the dim light from the flickering candle she had carried cast long shadows over the contents of the chest. Inside, there was nothing but a single, faded journal. The leather binding was cracked, and the pages looked fragile, as if they hadn't been touched in years. Emma carefully pulled the journal from the chest, her fingers grazing over the old pages as she opened it. The ink was faded, but still legible. The writing was neat, precise, almost too precise, as if it had been written under duress. The journal belonged to someone named Agnes Blackthorne, a name Emma did not recognize. As she flipped through the pages, she discovered the first entry, dated long before her time. It was clear that Agnes had been deeply involved in the commune's rituals, writing about them in vivid detail. The further Emma read, the more her stomach churned. The journal recounted dark, forbidden ceremonies, the summoning of ancient forces, the sacrifices made under the blood moon, the ritual that bound the living to the dead. Agnes wrote of a pact made with an entity far older than any human. The entity had demanded a price, the lives of the innocent, the blood of the pure, the sacrifice of those who did not belong. Agnes had been one of the leaders of the commune, part of the inner circle that had called forth the evil that now haunted the house. She had performed the rites, welcomed the entity into their world, and in return, she had been granted power, immortality, and control over the spirits that had once been bound to the land. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice carrying just above the whisper of the wind. "This is how it must be. We are the keepers of a balance you cannot yet understand." A chill ran down her spine as she realized that they were not the only ones present. A shadow, darker than the night itself, seemed to stretch across the altar, It felt like it was alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. The chanting began softly at first, the words foreign and guttural. Emma strained to make sense of the language, but it was impossible. It sounded ancient, pre-human, as though it was a language spoken by something that had never walked the earth. Rowan raised his arms toward the sky. "Tonight we call upon the blood moon," he intoned, "to unveil what is hidden, to awaken that which slumbers." The circle around the altar deepened in their chants, their voices growing louder, their words faster, like the beating of 1,000 hearts. Emma felt her chest tighten as an overwhelming sense of dread gripped her. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs refused to obey. The moon overhead began to pulse in time with the chant, casting unnatural shadows that seemed to grow and shrink, twisting like tendrils reaching toward her. The air crackled with an energy so dense it felt like it might crush her. The ground beneath her feet shifted, groaning as though the earth itself was alive. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and Emma could barely breathe. The wind picked up, howling around her as though the very atmosphere was being torn apart. And then the moon shifted. For a split second, everything stood still. The air, the chanting, even the wind, all paused in reverence. And in that silence, Emma heard it. A voice, cold and ancient, whispered directly into her mind. "You shouldn't have come." Her heart stopped. The voice wasn't Rowan's. It wasn't anyone's. It was something deeper, something older, something from the void between life and death. The moon flared suddenly, casting everything in a blinding red light. A scream pierced the silence, a single cry that echoed across the commune, reverberating through the trees and the walls, shaking the very foundations of the house. But no one moved. No one reacted. It was then that Emma realized, in the cold, stark terror of that moment, that this ritual wasn't a tradition. It wasn't a harmless ceremony. It was a summoning. And something was coming. Chapter 6, The Shadow's Call. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness. Emma's footsteps echoed through the darkened hallway as she clutched the journal in her trembling hands. The house, once familiar, now felt like a prison, its walls alive with the pulse of an ancient, malevolent energy. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, reaching for her soul. Her mind raced as she thought back to the journal's final entry, Agnes's confession weighing heavily on her. The blood moon, the pact, the entity, it was all connected. This house had been a place of power, a conduit for the forces that should never have been unleashed. Emma had never believed in the supernatural, never put much stock in ancient myths or superstitions. But the truth was clear now. The horrors of the past were alive, festering within the walls of the house. The whispers, once faint, were now unmistakable, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She tried to ignore them, but their voices grew louder, more insistent. They were speaking to her, urging her, beckoning her toward the center of the house. Her breath caught in her throat as the temperature dropped even further. She could see her breath clouding in the air, a visible sign of the cold that seemed to seep from the very foundations of the house. The chill wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, a frigid, suffocating presence that made every step feel like wading through the depths of a frozen nightmare. Her heart raced as the whispers grew more distinct, forming words that crawled into her ears like insects burrowing beneath her skin. Come closer. Emma stopped dead in her tracks. The voice wasn't just in her head, it was everywhere surrounding her. She spun around, her eyes darting over the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the house was empty. The whispers persisted, growing louder, more urgent. She could almost feel the fingers of unseen hands brushing against her skin, coaxing her, pulling her forward. She had to resist. She had to leave. But she couldn't move. Her legs felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding her in place, rooting her to the floor. The journal, still clutched in her hands, seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very words within it were alive. Emma's gaze fell on the last page she'd read, the one detailing Agnes's final thoughts. "The house is cursed," Agnes had written, "and we are its prisoners." The realization struck Emma with brutal clarity. The house wasn't just a vessel of evil, it was an active participant in the horrors. The walls, the rooms, the very air, they were all part of a living, breathing organism that fed on fear, on suffering. With a sudden surge of resolve, Emma forced herself to take a step. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what to do next, but she had to move. She had to escape. The blood moon was rising higher in the sky now, casting an eerie crimson glow through the windows. The ritual had begun again. But something stopped her in her tracks. At the far end of the hallway, a door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in an unnatural red light. It wasn't the light of the moon, it was something else, something darker. The room seemed to call to her, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. She hesitated, heart pounding in her chest. The whispers were louder now, more frantic. "Come," they urged. "Come and see the truth." Emma swallowed hard, her mind screaming for her to turn and run. But the pull of the room, the pull of whatever waited inside, was irresistible. She couldn't fight it. Not anymore. With every step she took, the air grew heavier, the darkness more oppressive. It was as though the house itself was pressing down on her, forcing her forward. The door to the room swung open with a sharp, unnatural creak, and Emma stepped inside. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house. The red light seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The room was empty, save for a large, ancient mirror standing against one wall. It was framed in dark, weathered wood, and its surface was covered in a thick layer of dust. But Emma knew that the mirror wasn't just a reflection of the room. It was a window to something far worse. She approached it slowly, her breath shallow, her pulse racing. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices that seemed to rise and fall with the beating of her heart. She couldn't escape them. They were inside her head, inside her very soul. As Emma gazed into the mirror, the reflection shifted. It wasn't her own face staring back at her. Instead, the glass was filled with the image of a woman she didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. Agnes Blackthorne. The woman in the mirror smiled, her lips curling into a grotesque, mocking grin. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits of despair, and her skin was stretched tight like the face of someone who had been dead for far too long. "You should have never come back," Agnes's voice echoed through the room, her words cold and full of malice. "The house has claimed you. There is no escape from the blood moon." Emma stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The mirror shimmered, distorting, until the reflection of Agnes faded into something far worse. The room seemed to twist around her, warping into something grotesque, something alive. The shadows reached out, curling around her legs, pulling her toward the mirror. Her hands shot out, but they were no longer her own. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her body was no longer her own. She was being pulled, trapped, consumed by the house, by the evil it had awakened. And in that moment, Emma realized the terrible truth. She had never truly escaped. The house had always been waiting for her, watching, biding its time. It had always known she would return. The blood moon was complete. The house was alive. and Emma was trapped within its walls forever. As the room consumed her, she felt the cold embrace of the entity's power, and everything went black. Chapter 07: The Waking Nightmare. Emma's mind thrashed, as if trapped in an endless nightmare. But when she opened her eyes, it wasn't the familiar darkness of sleep that greeted her. The world around her was distorted, twisted, as if reality itself had unraveled. The cold touch of the air, the suffocating weight on her chest, she could feel it all, yet she couldn't move. She was lying on a cold, hard floor of the room, the mirror still looming in front of her. But it was different now, darker, pulsing with an ominous energy. Its surface no longer reflected the room. It reflected her. Emma reached out instinctively, her hand trembling as it hovered near the mirror. Her fingers brushed against the glass, but it wasn't glass at all. It was soft, warm, like flesh. She recoiled in horror, but the sensation didn't leave. It lingered, crawling under her skin. A voice echoed from the mirror, Agnes's voice. "You should have known," it whispered. "The blood moon never forgets." Emma tried to scream, but her mouth refused to obey. Her body felt like stone, too heavy, too stiff. Something held her in place, something darker than the shadows themselves. The whispers returned, louder now, as if they were being spoken by the house itself, its walls closing in on her. "The house has chosen you," they whispered in unison. "The price must be paid." It was then that she saw them, figures moving at the edge of her vision, flickering in and out of sight like shadows dancing in the corner of a room. They were no longer human, no longer anything Emma could recognize. Their faces were distorted, twisted in grotesque forms that seemed to ripple and shift as if they were made of liquid. They were the lost souls, the remnants of those who had come before her. And now Emma realized she was one of them. The house had claimed her. A sharp, burning pain shot through Emma's chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The house was feeding on her fear, on her soul. She could feel it draining her, piece by piece. The walls seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like the beating of a monstrous heart. But the pain wasn't enough to stop her. She couldn't let it end like this. She couldn't let the house consume her as it had consumed Agnes and so many others. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break the cycle. Gathering every ounce of strength she had left, Emma forced herself to stand. Her legs felt like jelly, trembling beneath her, but she pushed herself forward, away from the mirror. She had to get out. She had to find the truth before it was too late. Her mind raced as she stumbled toward the door. She wasn't sure how long she'd been in the room, how long the house had held her in its grip. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, keep fighting. The house would not have her. Not yet. She stepped into the hallway, but it was no longer the familiar hallway she had once known. The walls were closing in, the floorboards creaking underfoot like the house itself was shifting, adjusting to her presence. It felt alive, alive and hungry. Suddenly the whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. "She's awake. The blood moon is hungry." They were everywhere. The voices seemed to come from every direction, all at once, a chorus of despair and torment. Emma's heart raced as she forced herself to keep moving. The staircase ahead was barely visible, shrouded in an impenetrable fog that seemed to swirl around the banister like living tendrils. But then a figure appeared in the fog, standing at the top of the stairs. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the shadows, but the presence was unmistakable. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the very weight of the house was bearing down on her. She knew this figure. She had seen it in her dreams and the reflection of the mirror. It was the same thing that had been haunting her every step. The figure began to descend the stairs slowly, its footsteps deliberate and heavy. Emma could see its face now, twisted, contorted, a grotesque mask of a human being. But it was no longer human. It was something far worse. It was Agnes, but not the Agnes from the journal. This was the Agnes that had been consumed by the house, the one who had made the fatal pact and become part of the house's dark legacy. Agnes smiled, a twisted, knowing grin. "You cannot escape," she said, her voice hollow, almost a whisper in the thick silence of the house. "The blood moon demands its due. It always does." The temperature dropped further, the cold seeping into Emma's bones. Her chest tightened, suffocating her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The house was closing in on her, and Agnes, the thing that had once been Agnes, was its harbinger. Emma stepped back, panic rising in her chest. She had to do something, anything, to stop this. But as she turned, she saw something that made her blood run cold. At the end of the hallway stood another figure. It was a man this time, his face obscured by a hood, his body cloaked in a dark, tattered robe. The figure raised a hand, and in that moment, Emma knew. This was no mere servant of the house. This was the one who had summoned it all, the one who had cast the ritual all those years ago. The man smiled, and it was a smile that promised only pain. "You are not alone, Emma." His words echoed, a sinister warning. And then, as if on cue, the house itself seemed to shift, its walls groaning, its floors trembling beneath Emma's feet. Something was coming, something far worse than anything she had yet encountered. The house was not finished with her, not by a long shot. The blood moon had not yet reached its zenith. The worst was yet to come. Chapter 08: The Unraveling. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she stood at the top of the staircase, the two figures below her, Agnes and the hooded man, closing in with every breath she took. The cold that enveloped the house seemed to freeze her very soul, locking her in place. She could feel it now, the suffocating pressure of the house, its unseen hands wrapping around her throat. The whispers began again, louder this time, a cacophony of voices pressing in from every corner of the house. "It has begun. There's no escape." Emma tried to take a step back, but her legs betrayed her, trembling beneath the weight of fear. The darkness of the hallway stretched before her like an endless abyss, the walls closing in with every passing second. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, but she knew there was no time to panic, no time to break down. She needed answers, answers that were just beyond her reach. She could feel them lurking beneath the surface, like the dark veins of the house, ready to explode into the open. But it was the figure of Agnes, the twisted woman who had once been a friend, that drew her attention. Agnes's face twisted with an unsettling smile, her eyes glowing with a fevered light that made Emma's stomach churn. "You should have never come back," Agnes hissed, her voice an eerie mockery of the woman Emma had once known. "You are part of this now. You always have been." Emma's head spun as if the very air was turning to smoke around her. The walls pulsed with something more than just the whispering voices. They pulsed with a presence, a darkness that felt almost tangible. Agnes stepped closer, her figure moving unnaturally, her limbs jerking at odd angles, as if she were a puppet being pulled by strings. "You think you can break the cycle?" she crooned. "You think you can outrun it?" The man in the hood behind Agnes stepped forward, his face hidden beneath the shadows of his robe. His presence seemed to drain the light from the hallway, making it harder for Emma to see. But when he spoke, His voice was low and ominous, like the rustle of leaves in a storm. The blood moon has been waiting for you, Emma. Her heart skipped a beat. The blood moon. It was more than just a symbol of the ritual. It was the force behind it. The moon had been watching, listening, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. You are the key, the hooded man continued, his voice echoing off the walls. Without you, the house cannot complete its purpose. Without you, everything we've done will unravel. Emma felt a surge of nausea as the truth began to crystallize in her mind. This house, this commune, had been built for something darker than just a cult, a ritual gone wrong. The blood moon, the ritual, the darkness that had followed her since her return, they were all connected to her family. My family, Emma whispered, barely able to make sense of the words. What does this have to do with my family? The hooded man smiled, the shadows beneath his hood deepening. It's always been about your bloodline, Emma. Your father, your ancestors. They were the ones who started this. You are the last link in the chain. You are the one who will finally open the door. Agnes's laugh was a bitter sound, like nails on a chalkboard. But you were always meant to be part of it, she said. Everything that's happened, everything you've been running from, has been pulling you closer. You can't escape the truth. The blood moon had been watching, waiting for this very moment. The ritual that had begun so many years ago had never truly ended. It had merely lain dormant, like a virus, waiting to infect the next generation. And now Emma was the final piece of the puzzle. Before Emma could speak, the hooded man raised a hand, and a cold wind howled through the house. The walls groaned, as if in response to his power. The door's already open, he said. It's only a matter of time before you join us. Suddenly the air shifted, and Emma felt a sharp pressure in her chest. It was as if the house itself were pulling at her very being, drawing her closer to the source of its power. She staggered forward, desperate to break free from its hold. But there was nowhere to go. The house had become a maze, its corridors endless, its rooms twisting in impossible angles. The shadows seemed to close in on her, pressing against her skin, suffocating her. She could feel the presence of the house, alive, hungry, and angry. The blood moon was rising higher now, its crimson light seeping through the cracks in the walls, bathing the house in an eerie, unnatural glow. Emma stumbled backward, her heart racing. You will never leave, Agnes whispered, her voice now more like a growl. You are one of us now. Emma's mind reeled as she tried to find some shred of hope, some way to fight back. But there was nothing left. The darkness was too powerful, too pervasive. And as she turned toward the stairs, she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was being drawn into the heart of the house. The blood moon's light bathed the staircase, casting twisted shadows across the walls. And at the top of the stairs stood the doorway, the final threshold, the place where everything would end. Without thinking, Emma moved toward it. There was no time to hesitate, no time to question. The door was already open. But as she reached for the doorknob, a sudden force grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. She screamed, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming sound of the house groaning, as if it were alive, as if it had grown impatient. You cannot escape the blood moon, the hooded man said, his voice a distant whisper as Emma was dragged back into the darkness. And then, as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, Emma realized the truth. She had never been meant to escape. The house would always claim her, and the blood moon would always rise. Chapter 09, The Final Hour. Emma's heart pounded against her chest, each beat echoing through the cold, hollow corridors of the house. The darkness wrapped itself around her like a suffocating cloak, pulling her deeper into the abyss. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the house itself was dragging her down. The figure of the hooded man loomed behind her, his presence like a shadow that clung to her every move. Agnes, with her eyes gleaming with a twisted hunger, stood just ahead, her mouth stretched into an unsettling grin. Emma's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, but no matter how fast she ran, she couldn't escape the pull of the house. It's too late. Agnes's voice drifted toward her like a whisper on the wind. You can't outrun the truth, Emma. It's in your blood. You're just as much a part of this as we are. The house seemed to respond to Agnes's words, groaning like some ancient beast awakened from its slumber. The walls began to tremble, the floors shaking beneath Emma's feet. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, a force so powerful it threatened to consume everything in its path. Emma stumbled, her vision blurring, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The door, the final threshold, was just ahead. If she could reach it, she might be able to escape. She might be able to tear herself free from this nightmare. But the closer she got, the more the house seemed to fight her. The shadows swelled, pressing against her from all sides, as if the very walls of the house were trying to swallow her whole. The blood moon's crimson light seeped through the cracks in the walls, casting an eerie, unnatural glow across the room. It was as though the moon itself was watching her, waiting for the moment when she would finally fall into its grasp. The door won't save you. The hooded man's voice was low, his tone almost soothing, as though he were speaking to a child. You can't escape what you are, what you were always meant to be. Emma's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing against its cold surface. The house groaned again, this time louder, as if it were a living thing protesting her every move. She yanked the door open, the sound of it creaking on its hinges like the cries of a dying animal. Beyond the door there was nothing but darkness, the kind of emptiness that seemed to stretch on forever. With a desperate breath, Emma stepped forward. The instant her foot crossed the threshold, the world around her seemed to collapse. The walls of the house warped and twisted, the floor buckling beneath her, and the shadows twisted into monstrous shapes that reached out for her. She felt herself falling, the floor beneath her vanishing, as if the house itself had opened up beneath her feet. No, she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the sound of the house's terrible groan. The ground fell away entirely, and Emma found herself plummeting into the void, the cold, dark air rushing past her. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. She hit the ground hard, a jarring pain shooting through her body, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Her vision flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When her eyes opened again, she found herself in a place that felt wrong. It was the house. But it wasn't. The walls were the same, the floors the same, but everything was distorted, hazy, like a nightmare that refused to let go. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows seemed to stretch and move on their own, as if they had a life of their own. Welcome to the final step, Emma. The hooded man's voice echoed through the distorted space, sending chills down her spine. This is where it ends, where you finally become part of it. Emma staggered to her feet, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling. What was this place? Had she fallen into the house's very heart? Was this the point of no return? She looked around, panic rising in her chest. The door was gone. The hallway was gone. All that remained was a room filled with shadows that seemed to whisper and shift. This is where your ancestors began their ritual. The hooded man continued, his voice like a drumbeat in the distance, getting louder with every word. This is where it will end. Your bloodline was always meant to bring the ritual to completion. Emma's heart sank as the realization hit her. The blood moon, the ritual, it had always been leading her here, to this moment, to the final step. She had always been the key. You were always destined to open the door. Agnes's voice joined in, her laugh echoing through the room. You were never meant to escape. You were always part of this. Emma's vision blurred as the shadows around her seemed to come to life, their twisted forms stretching and shifting, pulling her in, surrounding her. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls, the shadows, the very air, it all closed in on her, suffocating her, drowning her in the weight of it. It's too late, the hooded man whispered, his voice growing louder, closer, as the darkness reached for her. You are the last piece. The ritual is complete. Welcome to the House of Lost Souls. Emma screamed, but her voice was lost, swallowed by the darkness, as the house closed in around her. And then, in an instant, it was over. The darkness consumed her, and the house fell silent. Chapter 10. The House Awakens. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma's scream, her desperate cry for help, faded into the nothingness. She was surrounded by darkness, but this wasn't the empty void of before. This darkness felt alive, suffocating, as though the very air around her had turned into a living, breathing entity, waiting for her to succumb. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, as though something was pulling her down. A cold, invisible force gripped her body, holding her in place. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything was slipping away, as though she were being erased, one piece at a time. But then a faint light flickered before her eyes, a soft golden glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. It was distant at first, but it grew slowly, inexorably, drawing her attention. She forced herself to move, her legs trembling beneath her. With every step, the darkness seemed to retreat, unwilling to let go, but helpless against the pull of the light. It wasn't much, just a faint glow in the center of the room, but it was enough. It was a sign, a chance. Her breath quickened, her body fighting against the invisible chains that bound her. She reached out, her fingers grazing the edges of the light. It felt warm, comforting, like the embrace of something familiar. And then, in that moment, everything changed. The light exploded, bright and blinding, flooding the room with its intensity. The darkness writhed and recoiled as though it were alive and afraid of the light's power. Emma staggered back, shielding her eyes, but the light grew stronger, burning away the shadows until only the glow remained, and with it a figure emerged. At first, she couldn't make it out clearly. It was just a silhouette against the brilliant glow. But then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw the figure clearly. It was a woman, tall, ethereal, and cloaked in a flowing white gown that seemed to shimmer with a light of its own. The woman's eyes were piercing, their gaze sharp and knowing. They were the eyes of someone who had seen centuries of pain, loss, and darkness, but had survived it all. You've made it this far, the woman's voice echoed, soft but strong. But you must understand the truth now, Emma. Emma's mind raced. Who was this woman? How was she connected to everything? Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to speak. What is this place? Emma's voice trembled, but she held her ground. What have I become? The woman's expression softened, a faint sadness in her eyes. This is the heart of the house, the place where the past and future collide. You are the final piece, the one who must carry the burden. The curse has been passed down through generations, and now it has come to you. But you are not just a victim, Emma. You were the key. Emma took a step back, her mind reeling. A key, she whispered. What do you mean? The woman nodded, her gaze unwavering. Your bloodline has always been tied to the darkness within this house. Every generation has tried to escape, to sever the connection, but it always comes back. And now you have the power to break it or to let it consume you. Emma's chest tightened. She didn't want this. She didn't want any of it. She had come here to escape, to understand the truth, but this was too much. She couldn't bear the weight of it. But the woman's voice was steady, filled with the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless souls. You have a choice, Emma, she said softly. You can remain in this house, allow it to consume you like it did the others before you. Or you can take the power within you and destroy the curse, sever the connection between your bloodline and the evil that lurks in the shadows. But know this, the darkness will never truly be gone. It will always wait, lurking, ready to claim the next generation. The choice is yours. Emma closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of the lives lost, the agony that had haunted her family for so long. She thought of her own life, of everything she could still lose if she chose wrong. When she opened her eyes again, she knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, Emma stepped forward, her heart filled with resolve. The woman smiled, as if she had known all along what Emma's decision would be. Then it's time, the woman said, raising her hands. Let it end. The light surged around Emma, filling every inch of the room, washing over her like a tidal wave. The shadows screamed as they were pulled into the light, disintegrating into nothingness. The house itself groaned, its walls shaking as the very foundation seemed to tremble. Emma's vision blurred, the pain in her chest rising to unbearable levels, but she didn't flinch. She stood firm, her heart pounding with the rhythm of the final act. With a final blinding flash, the darkness was gone. When the light faded, the house was still, silent. The oppressive air was gone, replaced with a strange, unsettling calm. The woman, too, was gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint echo of her presence. Emma stood alone in the center of the room, breathing heavily, her body trembling. She looked around at the empty house, the cold, lifeless walls surrounding her. The house was no longer the prison it had been. It had been freed. She had freed it. But as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her, waiting in the silence. She stepped outside, the fresh air filling her lungs, and for the first time since entering the house, she felt free. But deep down, Emma knew the truth. Evil never truly dies. It waits in the shadows, biding its time, waiting for the next blood moon to rise. And when it does, the house will call again.